on this Sunday morning. A Fox News alert. All eyes on London this morning after another deadly terrorist attack there. At least 7 people are dead, another 50 others injured.
This is, as we all know, the 3rd terrorist attack Britain has experienced in the last 3 months.
I was taking pictures of the Tower Bridge. I heard a loud noise behind me and turned around to see the white van crashed into the guardrail, and it was continuing to go down the guardrail, hitting pedestrians. Everyone was standing in shock as to what had happened. We took a selfie right before. Directly afterward, the photo is of several bystanders attending to a person that had gotten hit. People were mainly in shock. Such a quiet night like that, a terrorism event is not something you would expect to happen.
These attacks are not accidental. They know where the people are.
We will be doing absolutely everything in our power to try to stop such a horrendous attack as this.
London is under siege. The only way to deal with a terrorist siege is to respond with terrorism on those sympathies.
No reason to be alarmed by this. We are the safest global city in the world.
While we have made significant progress in recent years, there is, to be frank, far too much tolerance of extremism in our country. We cannot and must not pretend that things can continue as they are.
Well, welcome into Fox and Friends. The Western world again wakes up to the reality of terrorism on the streets of London.
Yeah, another terrorist attack striking at the heart of London. 3 jihadists using a van to mow down dozens of people on London Bridge last night.
Yeah, and then they abandoned that van. They went on a stabbing spree in several nearby restaurants. Those terrorists, they were shot dead by police, but not before killing 7 people and injuring 48 others. They were reportedly wearing fake bomb vests in order to, of course, cause confusion and trick the police.
Look at that photo right now. That's one of the jihadists who believes himself to be a soldier of Allah, of Islam, wearing a fake suicide belt, as you said, camouflage pants, wielding a knife, slitting throats after running people down with a truck. There's also reports of 5 people arrested. During the show, we've been reporting that counterterrorism raids have been occurring across London. Currently 5 arrested, and Fox News is working to confirm those numbers.
We've also been getting reports from people who are walking home or who live right there nearby, and this is a normal course of action for them to walk across London Bridge. Joining us this morning live from London is an American tourist, Brad Myers. He was there and watched as the terrorists mowed their van onto London Bridge. Brad, thank you for joining us this morning. What did you see last night?
Well, I was taking photos on the London Bridge about halfway down of the Tower Bridge, which is actually the more picturesque bridge that you're going to want to take pictures of. It was about 10 p.m. I was doing this. I wanted to carry on towards the Tower Bridge a little further. There's a river walk there. So I walked to the north side of the bridge and walked down 2 flights of stairs, went to the Thames and began the river walk. Not 1 minute later, I heard a sound behind me, so turned around and saw a van beginning to go on the pedestrian walkway that I had just been on just a few minutes prior.
How eerie this photo, and sorry to interrupt you, but that photo that we showed just a few minutes ago, to play some context for our viewers, was a selfie that you had just taken, right? To explain this photo that we're looking at
Just
here.
moments before that attack happened, Brad.
Right. It was. It's really crazy to think about. Just right there, it was very peaceful. It had rained a little earlier in the night, but it had cleared off, and it was pretty nice, a little cool. So not too many people walking around. I would estimate about 20 or so on the bridge, and just it's crazy to think that I was right there.
At what point did you realize that it was?
Came.
What point did you realize it was a terror attack?
Well, I immediately, that was my first thought, considering it is, the summer months, it's during Ramadan, it's very possible that, that I was always on alert that it could happen. We've had a string of them very recently. So turned around, it actually reminded me of the attack on Nice was the first thing that went through my mind. But everyone around was just in absolute shock on the north side of the bridge, watching what was unfolding.
Brad, if you would, describe the police response. Apparently the attack, start to finish, lasted about 8 minutes. What did you see from law enforcement and the reaction from people?
Yes, when I went back up the stairs, waited about 2 or 3 minutes before the police came in. I'm assuming they were stationed relatively close. They weren't on the bridge before or patrolling or anything, but they came roaring through from the north side, at least from what I saw, directly towards the site of the accident.
We also heard reports of
not an accident,
where people were jumping off the bridge in order to save themselves. Did you witness that?
Yes, when I was below, I saw at least one person jump off the bridge, presumably to avoid the truck that was coming through.
Brad, when were you finally able to tell your family and your loved ones that you were okay?
I called them very close. Immediately after I saw the police coming through, I could see that it was really best to leave the area just for everyone's safety. And now knowing what did happen on the south side, thank God that I was able to do that. So jumped in a cab, called home, and was able to get safely back to my hotel, thank God.
Well, they're able to see you live this morning. I'm sure that makes them rest easy this morning as well. Thank you so much, Brad.
Brad.
We appreciate you joining us. We want to bring in Mark Steyn this morning. Thanks, Brad, journalist and author. We were talking in the commercial break. Mark, this is not new. You're not surprised.
You've been talking about this for years, Mark.
Yeah, and the problem is that it's not a native problem to England, Ireland, Scotland, Europe. This problem was imported. So the first thing you have to do is stop importing it. And the reality is that in Britain and in Europe, more people who agree with this ideology and a smaller percentage who want to do what these guys did yesterday arrive at the airports and ports every day. So the first thing someone like Theresa May needs to do is to stop importing more of it.
Mark, in your book, America Alone, I'll never forget this statistic. You wrote about how the most prominent boy's name of a newborn boy in London today, 3 times over, is Muhammad.
Yeah, and not just in London, but in England and Wales. And people say, oh, well, it's if you have Mohammed with an O and Mohammed with a U and Mahmoud, it doesn't. No, this is the biggest source of population growth down the spine of the United Kingdom in every major British city, Glasgow, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, Bristol, all the way to London. And the question is, the problem for Britain is, and for Europe, is that there are people who agree with every objective of these crazy guys last night. They want to live under Sharia in the United Kingdom. They want the flag of Islam flying over Buckingham Palace. They want death for apostasy. They think that homosexuals should be executed. They think that women should be covered from head to... You can agree with all that, and as Theresa May sees it, still be a perfectly functioning, respectable citizen of a modern Western society.
Well, you mentioned Theresa May. We heard from her this morning, the UK Prime Minister, probably the strongest we've heard her on terrorism. Of course, she's got that election coming up in just a few days. But she talked about political correctness, and she said that there's been too much tolerance when it comes to extremism. Take a listen to what she said.
While we have made significant progress in recent years, there is, to be frank, far too much tolerance of extremism in our country. So we need to become far more robust in identifying it and stamping it out across the public sector and across society. That will require some difficult and often embarrassing conversations. But the whole of our country needs to come together to take on this extremism.
Have they made significant progress?
Well, no, I think that use of that word, extremism, is actually, that's embarrassing, Mrs. May. That's a ridiculous term for it. The pop star Morrissey from Manchester last week, he said, well, what do you mean, an extremist? An extremist what? An extremist bunny rabbit? In the heyday of the IRA, there was no problem about identifying Irish republicanism for what it is. You can't deal with an enemy unless you identify the enemy, and that was a much smaller problem between, you know, people who had a lot more in common than we do with those guys last night.
So then how do you stop it? I mean, you know, naming it is one thing, of course, but then getting in there, we talk about the unemployment rate. I mean, they're desperate, right? These young boys are desperate.
No, they're not. They're not desperate.
At all?
I disagree with the general on that. If you look at Manchester, there's a high unemployment rate because you don't have to work. luck. The guy who pulled off the Ariana Grande thing, he used his student loans from British taxpayers to fly to Libya and train to become a terrorist. So he blew apart all those young girls on the British taxpayers'
So if it's not money, then what is it? What are they looking for?
It's ideology, right?
It is ideology.
But they're looking for something, and they find it in that, I guess, is the question.
Yes, because there's a big hole in the heart of... I mean, what's fascinating to me is not the guys who come from Libya a couple of years ago. What's interesting to me is people born and bred in these Western nations...
That are already there.
And they feel nothing for the countries they're supposedly citizens of. Because they're taught that their countries are racist, imperialist, colonialist. They're responsible for all the bad isms in the world. And the British political class, Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, to be totally laughable about it, also believes that Britain is evil and imperialist and colonialist and racist.
Mark, how do we wake up? Last night we went to bed thinking we were going to talk about climate change and us leaving the Paris Climate Accord. Our own Freedom Tower here lit up in green in solidarity with the environment. Yet I drive in this morning, the Freedom Tower not lit that way because the world wakes up to the reality of terrorism. How do our Western leaders come to terms with the fact that climate change is not the greatest threat we face, it's Islamism?
No, I'm not worried about sea levels in the Maldives in the year 2100 because those islands are Sunni Muslim and they'll all be living in Paris and London by the year 2100. So you can worry about that, which is a fatuous delusion. When Sadiq Khan says there's no reason for people to be alarmed, you look at not the 7 dead people, not the dozens of injured, but you look at the hundreds and thousands, the police bellowing at them out of control. Get out, get out, get out here. That's not how a British constable talks, or used to talk. Having to walk around with your arms up in the air so that you're not mistaken for a terrorist and get shot. This is life in London in the second decade of the 21st century, and when Sadiq Khan says there's no reason to be alarmed, he's part of the problem and he should be out of a job.
He's the mayor of London. We heard from Theresa May, as we mentioned earlier this morning. She laid out 4 points. She laid out 4 different points that she wanted to address, one of which was spreading Western ideology. Trying to get into the hearts. You mentioned these guys have holes in their hearts. They don't have a strong sense of purpose. For Western ideology, how do you fill that? I mean, how do you fill that vacuum?
Well, they always say that, oh, we will never surrender our values and never say what they are.
What are their values?
I know. And so the values are like tomorrow, and I disagree with Abby here with respect. I think this pop concert is ridiculous. I think this idea that you get Ariana Grande and Justin Bieber and Katy Perry and everyone holds hands and says all you need is love.
My point, Mark, is that you need to keep living. You need to not live in fear, and you need to keep doing the things that you would normally do. This concert was already planned, so if they were to cancel that, that would mean we're changing our lives for what these terrorists did. I think that is coming across weak. That's not what we should do.
No, but you also have to give people a sense that they are part. I'm not ashamed to say it. Western civilization is the greatest civilizational inheritance on this planet. We've got 8 centuries of great stuff since Magna Carta. We've got Shakespeare, we've got Mozart, we've got Katy Perry, we've got all the good stuff. And the idea that we're somehow ashamed of it, and it's that for 2 generations now, and that's true here in the United States too, is if you raise people to be ashamed of their civilizational inheritance, some will seek new beliefs like climate change, but others will seek what these lunatics
that fill that sense of purpose that they're looking for.
I do love that you held up Katy Perry in the same light as Mozart, by the way.
Yeah, they're working here.
You're going to want to take
duets album.
You're going to want to take that one back.
All right, Mark Stein, good to have you with us today.
Thanks for your analysis, as always, Mark. Well, so how do we defeat the violent threat of radical Islam and change the mind of troubled extremists? A former jihadist has a plan. You're going to hear from him next. All right, we are back this morning. While no group is taking credit for the attack so far in London, ISIS urges followers to use Ramadan to launch an all-out war against the West.
Here to weigh in is former radical jihadist turned counterterrorism expert Mubin Sheikh. Thank you very much for joining us. Your take, sir, on what you see there, the scope of the problem at hand.
Well, first of all, I want to give a shout-out to the London police for shooting 3 attackers dead within the first 8 minutes of the emergency call. And secondly, of course, as the Prime Minister, the spokesperson for the UK government, Ms. May said, look, they are dealing with a big problem. I mean, there are more than enough. I think your former guest said there are plenty of fifth column Islamist supremacists who are working every day to confound counterterrorism efforts. It is a war for all intents and purposes.
We've had you on the program once before mention that fifth column idea. What is that? Explain that for our audience a little bit.
It means you're talking about a group of Muslim supremacists who have no loyalty to the UK, have loyalty or sympathy or outright support for those that are against the UK, believe in ideologies of separationism, of British society is non-Muslim. We can never have any kind of loyalty to it. We can rob them, steal from them, welfare fraud. You name it.
Right.
This is your fifth column.
And a lot of them are already living in places like Europe and here in the U.S. It's not about them flying here from the Middle East. As Mark Steyn just said, we're talking about second generation that feel like they don't have the sense of identity, and that's where they find it, by becoming a terrorist. How do we impact them? How do we figure out that part of the problem? How do we make sure these people don't turn into that?
Well, we need to stay away from the narratives that they feed off of. So, for example, one of the things ISIS wants is for people to make this a war on Islam. And we should not do their work for them. That's just one side of it. But there's an ideology that underpins all of this that needs to be directly engaged and confronted. You cannot have Muslims living in these countries that give Muslims so many rights and then effectively, work against that same government. That's not acceptable.
Well, as a former jihadist, I mean, the question that's top of my mind this morning, Theresa May, was the first point that she made. We need to change the hearts and minds and, push Western ideology on them so that they don't turn to this. As a former jihadist yourself, what changed your heart, and how can we change the hearts of them?
Yeah, I mean, for me, look, it was in the mid-90s. I had met the Taliban, and then 98, Osama bin Laden, and then, of course, 9/11 was the real, push for me to reconsider my commitment. I then went and studied the religion properly and realized that, listen, terrorism is a crime in Islam. We should never equate terrorists and Islam because we're validating their worldview, and that's the last thing we need to do. We need to oppose them, counter them, delegitimize them every step of the way.
And educate them.
Moben Sheikh, good to have you with us this morning.
Thank you.
Until they take student loans and use them to fly to Libya. All right, President Trump tweeting this morning, we must stop being politically correct after the London attacks. How else should the president respond? Former Deputy Campaign Manager David Bossie.
We're back with a Fox News alert. Terror striking London once again, and just moments ago the president tweeting saying this: we must stop being politically correct and get down to the business of security for our people. If we do not get smart, it will only get worse.
Here to react, former Deputy Campaign Manager for Donald Trump and Fox News contributor David Bossie. David, good to see you this morning. Some of the left outraged this morning at the president's tweets last night, and thinking that he got political and talking about the travel ban and other things. How do you see it?
Well, the President of the United States cares deeply about the victims in London, obviously. But the President of the United States got elected to be president here first and abroad second. And he is saying in reaction to what happened in London, it can happen here again. Look, we are almost 1 year to the day from the Orlando attack, a 1-year anniversary coming up on the terrible Orlando attack. And that's in the president's mind, and I think the president is trying to acknowledge that we can't have our heads in the sand. We must have vigilance here in this country. He has to have his rights given back to him by the Supreme Court, by these politicized justices below them, or judges below them, these Obama judges in the Ninth Circuit. We have a lot of things, a lot of problems today that the president needs to address, and his hands are tied.
Yeah, we're not just hearing that from President Trump. We're hearing similar message really for the first time from Theresa May this morning. I'm sure you heard her remarks a few hours ago saying that the threat of terror has never been greater and that we need to change the way that we are acting, the way that we're talking about it, the way that we are approaching it. I mean, similar to what we've heard from President Trump for a long time now.
That's exactly right. Look, President Trump is leading on this issue, and he has been for years, even before he got elected. And that's why he got elected. The American people are tired of the broken status quo. We need security at home and abroad, and that is one thing that President Obama did not do, and that President Trump is going to do.
David, as we talk here on the left side of the screen, we've got ongoing real-time raids happening in London. So far, 5 have been detained in raids. It looks like they're ongoing. I guess I'm now hearing 12 have been detained in raids around London. That number could continue to go up. So we're following this in real time, David, as we talk to you.
Sure.
You've been around the president and the candidate when these big types of events happen. How does President Trump react personally? We see his tweets coming out. We support London. We got to get rid of political correctness. We need the travel ban. But when he sees something like this, what is it? How does he react?
He is a human being just like the rest of us. So he is, first and foremost, his reaction is for the people who are harmed and hopefully getting great treatment by those first responders. And then he appreciates the first responders. As you can see, he's always somebody who looks out, because it is incredibly difficult as everyone is running away to go towards the sound of the explosions and of the gunfire. And that's what the London police, the London Fire Rescue are doing, and what they did. And they do it all the time. And this is not the first time. It just happened in Manchester, as we all know, last month. So these things are now becoming commonplace. And I think, look, if I was in the White House, I would be talking to the president today about going to walk on London Bridge and figuring out how, after the election this coming Thursday, how he could show solidarity with England and go over there and visit to show that we are not afraid and we're not going to be afraid. The other thing that we could do is hold those at Guantanamo Bay accountable. Look, we can have military tribunals for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and all of the other terrorists immediately. President Trump campaigned on getting justice for those families killed by these terrorists that are held in Guantanamo. I think we could step that up, because it's one thing that those terrorists understand, and that's power.
David, on the left side of our screen, we're watching these raids unfold. Scotland Yard now, it looks like they have this apartment complex cordoned off here, as they've done about 5 different raids that we know of at this hour in our newsroom. 12 people now arrested separately from these raids over the past 24 hours. I can't help but thinking, I mean, it seems reactive, right? We've heard from another guest this morning. It's reactive. Sadly, why wasn't this happening before?
These are reactive operations, and they need to be done. But we need to give the police, the intelligence communities, the tools, the power that they need in order to stop these events from happening before they happen. And that's one of the things that President Trump is going to be going to the Supreme Court for, is that his right as President of the United States to order a travel ban. That's a very basic safety measure that the president wants. It's just one measure of many, but it's one that he needs, and he needs to have it back, and it needs to be stopped being politicized by these Democrats who are really responsible for these future attacks if these people get in here based on us not being able to secure our borders.
Yeah, at some point this is all above politics. We've got to get to that point. But also the Muslim community stepping up. That's something we've heard from the president when he spoke in Saudi Arabia to the Arab nations, but also something that we heard this morning from Theresa May. I mean, clearly this is becoming a real focal point of we need the Muslim community to do their part.
I agree with that, but we've been listening to that line since 2001. When 3,000 Americans were killed on 9/11, we've heard nothing but the Muslim community must step up and help with this cause. And now we are 16 years on, and we have not seen that reaction, that result.
And David, what matters, it matters when you're in the middle of it, and when the Muslim mayor of London won't take an advantage of a moment like this to step up and say we clean up our community. That's when people start to shake their head and get frustrated.
I know I am. As an American, I'm frustrated by our lack of action over the last 8 years. I want to see President Trump succeed. He is, for the first time in 8 years, made fighting terrorism a priority in America and around the world. And so he's taking the fight abroad, and he's making sure that we don't have that fight here on our shores. And that's why he needs the power to be able to have this travel ban. It's common sense.
We should want him to succeed for the benefit of this country, for the good of this country. David Bossie, always good to have you with us.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for having me.
All right, coming up, some claim Britain has gone soft on Islamic extremism and opened their borders to a very dangerous and insidious threat.
Thank you so much.
Up next, Brexit leader Nigel Farage. He's here to react to that.
Plus, how can we protect ourselves here at home from the next terror attack? Former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino joins us.
Breaking right now, 12 people arrested in anti-terror raids just this morning in East London in connection to last night's terror attacks. This is a live look right there in East London, where more raids are happening right now.
Yeah, they have that whole apartment area cordoned off right now, going, looks like apartment to apartment. We're also learning that at least 2 police officers were hurt trying to stop the 3 attackers last night. This as the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, calls his city one of the safest cities in the world.
I'm appalled and furious that these cowardly terrorists would deliberately target innocent Londoners and bystanders enjoying their Saturday night. There can be no justification for the acts of these terrorists, and I'm quite clear that we will never let them win, nor will we allow them to cower our city or Londoners. People should remain calm and vigilant, carry on their normal business. I'm reassured that we are one of the safest global cities in the world, if not the safest global city in the world.
Here to react to that claim that is the safest global city in the world is Nigel Farage, former UK Independence Party leader and Fox News contributor. Nigel, you heard the mayor's comment, the Muslim mayor of London. He says it's safe. Yeah. He didn't mention radical Islam. What do you take on his take?
Well, I understand the mayor not wishing to spread panic, but what I would like to hear is him say, as the first Muslim mayor of London, I'm going to do all I can to work with the Muslim community to drive out the extremist preachers from our mosques, to do all we can to stop radicalisation happening in schools and happening in prisons.